Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon here. I hope everyone is having or has had a wonderful weekend. It's Sunday. It's going into Sunday evening here in Bangkok, Thailand. Of course, that probably means you are still, knee deep in your weekend, which is wonderful. And I hope, uh, you know, it's been great. If it has, it's been a one-off because during these times of COVID and economic crises reverberating throughout the world, it's highly unlikely that many are having great weekends. But mine's okay. My expectations aren't that high, so it's fairly easy for me to have an okay weekend. And I'm hoping that you've learned to temper your expectations so that the same is true for you. So the purposes of this video are to discuss, I can't show it, but I can talk about it. A Joe Rogan podcast or interview in his original studio back in 2017. And I was reminded of many of the things that made his show, the Joe Rogan Experience, great, and I mean, everything in life is problematic at times, right? Nothing is perfect. It's a ridiculous word to have in our vocabulary, as it's not attainable. Perfection simply doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. But be that as it may, his original format and his choices of material and his relaxed demeanor and willingness to dominate the conversation were probably the things that most drew his audience to him. Now, I realize not everyone agrees with what he says. Some people have questioned his intelligence, including himself. We all have limitations, and it's exceedingly important to recognize them, and I give him credit for at least acknowledging that he may have them. I personally feel that he is well equipped, all things being equal, to go about, what he does efficiently and entertainingly and edifyingly. I'm running out of gerund adverbs here, but okay. So the topic of the video that I watched was the situation with he picked the flat Earth topic, which is, to his credit, he handled very well, and I agree with him on all points throughout that particular broadcast. Obviously, it's at its core nonsense, but like many conspiratorial subjects that are ridiculed out of hand, we're failing to acknowledge something. Well, okay, some of us, of course, acknowledge it. But why is it that the need, particularly in the United States for some reason, I have a sense of what the reasons are, but we'll say for some reason, there is such a strong desire to construct alternative realities. After having given that quite a bit of thought, and also having lived outside of that sphere of perception, let's say. I'm forced to think back on some of my own foibles during the early parts of my educational process, my participation in public education. Now, I grew up in a rebellious age. Okay, that was the trend. Trust no one, question everything, and I still feel that that's pretty important. Okay, and critical thinking and questioning and analyzing, are absolutely essential to having a healthy framework for individual existence. But in many cultures, including the mainstream culture of America, you're simply not made aware of the importance of a couple of critical aspects of academia. Or at least emphasis is not placed on these aspects of academia, namely science and human psychology. Specifically, well, in the realms of science, it's pretty much all aspects: biology, physics, I can't think of an aspect of science that should not be held up as being paramount to a nation's educational priorities. But moving on to the human psychology, I'm not advocating that we teach psychology in at least in primary education, even in secondary education. However, I am a big fan of one aspect of psychology which often gets lumped into philosophy, which is Stoicism. Stoicism is a detailed study in how, in a choice that one has in how to perceive the inevitabilities of existence. Inevitabilities such as entropy. Now, I'm not a physicist, so I'm not going to take this in that particular direction. But entropy is the deterioration, let's say, of everything over time. Meaning that, in essence, things are in their highest ordered state at the moment of their inception, and in an immeasurable portion of a moment after that, it begins the process of deterioration, which eventually leads to complete entropy, where whatever the thing is that we're talking about is no longer recognizable as its original form. This takes place in physical reality, the things that we can touch, taste, smell, and feel, or hear, perhaps we can't see. But it also translates equally applicably to all the other aspects of existence. It translates into thought. It translates into relationships. It translates into everything. It is the basis of Siddhartha's realization. Siddhartha being entitled, or being given the title of the Buddha. That impermanence is the condition under which we live. So, whether we like it or not, change is a continuous verb. It is always happening, every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, of every lifetime. There are no static states of reality. This is the problem that I and many have with religious writings, because they are static. They do not evolve. They attempt to take an ever-changing universe and make it conform to, depending on the source, some archaic human construct of reality. So now here comes the resurgence of flat earth society, or the flat earth belief system, that somehow, and Joe points this out quite succinctly, in a universe where every object that we can observe distant from the earth, for all intents and purposes, is a three-dimensional spherical object. Even asteroids that look like potatoes and stuff are still three-dimensional. They are not flat. There is nothing floating around in the universe that is flat. And there is no model that you can make conform to the reality or to the life in which, the existence in which we find ourselves, that is flat. Again, as Joe pointed out, the arguments that are put forth are utterly absurd. When in recorded human history has anyone been able to keep a secret, let alone organizations that are comprised of tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people over time, where everyone is in complete agreement and decides not to allow the truth to be known? That would be one chink in the armor of the conspiratorial thought process. But there's more. So much more. How does it come about that these things are so readily accepted by so many? Well, I would argue it's because, when students in the classroom and public educational systems say things like, well, I'm never going to need this in the future, reasons not to focus or study or commit to memory any meaningful facts. Once that's allowed to be said and not challenged creatively and interestingly and innovatively, that's the attitude that remains with a good many people. I was one of them. Now, I rebelled against the educational system, and there were valid reasons for that, but my reasons, my motivations were not, let's say, fully baked. Okay, they sounded good, and they convinced many adults that I had, a healthy perspective and a justifiable position on the subject and all those kinds of things. I'm quick on my feet. The truth is, I was a fucking moron. And there was no one to push back with sufficient force to get me to accept that I would need this knowledge, and I would, if I was to have any hope of at least approaching objective reality, and I recognize that objective reality is an unattainable understanding, or imperceivable, at least to humans, thing. Nevertheless, there are certain physical constructs that are readily testable, readily observable, and if not provable, irrefutably agreeable, that we can base our fundamental understanding of the world upon. And I would posit that without these fundamental underpinnings of knowledge, we are susceptible to whatever is presented to us by people that appear to be more knowledgeable than us and offer us something that is less traumatic than the reality in which we live. Because the truth of the matter is, we are biologically unsuitable to the universe in which we exist. So, unpleasantness, to understate the obvious, is a moment-to-moment part of existence. There are no idyllic scenarios that we can construct that will obviate this fact. Excuse me. And not the least of which is age, which I am slowly succumbing to. I still push myself to the limit. I do I have not allowed any, at least of my physical capabilities to deteriorate. I have pushed myself to continue to do everything that I was capable of doing 40 years ago. But the price is high, my friends. Entropy is not. It's not avoidable, and I'm a perfect example. You would not recognize me if I showed you a picture of what I look like in my 30s or 40s, for example. So, yeah, obviously, reality is often traumatic. Many things sound so much more desirable by comparison to what actually is. But what ends up happening is we, without realizing it, by allowing false beliefs to alright, well, I'm not happy with this camera's performance anyway, so I'm gonna have to get another one and redo this. So it goes. Take care, everyone.